Hello and welcome to The Week That Really Was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan. For this week ending the 4th of July 2025, we will commence by wishing a happy Independence Day to our American friends and viewers and listeners, some of whom I know are big fans. I know you're big fans because, Sarah, somebody emailed me in this week from Minneapolis. I won't give your name, but you know who you are. And you said, and I quote, "I love listening to you every week, John. Your voice is like chocolate." And I just have to say, that was a really nice email because the comments aren't always that nice to me. Good afternoon, Sarah. How are you?
I'm good. Chocolate, eh? You've been called worse.
Chocolate.
You've been called worse.
I've been called worse things. And you know, when somebody refers to me as being like chocolate, that's how I know they're listening on the audio stream rather than watching on the live stream. Because if you're watching my live stream, you just hate my glasses. All right. Anyway, we've lots to talk about this week. I was going to have a conversation with you about how you're getting on with motherhood in the summer, and we will come to that. But I think because we're recording this on Thursday, the 3rd of July, the big news today, obviously, at least in some of the media, was that Ryan Casey, who people will know as the boyfriend / partner of the late Ashling Murphy, who was murdered some years ago in this country, settled his defamation case with the BBC for what is reported to be a 6-figure sum in compensation, plus his legal costs, plus a statement from the BBC. Pretty churlish statement, I thought, basically accepting that they didn't regard him as being far right or racist for what he said in his victim impact statement a couple of years ago. Were you following that story, and what did you make of it?
Loosely. What do I make of it? Well, I think it's a win for common sense, and I think that it's, obviously the right decision. I think that people who go on TV and the likes of the program that this happened on, and the likes of the journalist who said the defamatory comment, have gotten super arrogant about and the way in which they talk about people who disagree with them on some of the key issues in Ireland. And I think the fact that they've gotten rightly legally bitch slapped back into their box a bit is a really good thing for loads of reasons, notwithstanding the fact that he was defamed and he deserved to be compensated for that. But it's also, I think people will probably hopefully agree that it's not just about him, it's about a wider picture, which is that it was the case that anybody who spoke out in any way about immigration or whatever was fair game in terms of name calling and that kind of thing. And let's be honest, yes, he absolutely deserved that money and absolutely he was defamed. But if he hadn't been who he was, it would have just gone on.
Well, that's depressing. I don't know that I agree with you. I think anybody who's defamed in that way should take a defamation case.
But personally, what I'm talking about is that, when people in the North Inner City went out and protested at the very beginning, they were called racist by the political class. They were called far right. We were told that they were infiltrated by the far right. All this rhetoric was used about them. I appreciate that that's not defamatory because that's a generic statement about a group of people. But my point is that, they bit off more than they could chew with this guy for a variety of reasons, and he had a huge amount of public support. But they have been using language like that about people who criticize or have an opinion on immigration for a long time and getting away with it.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of things here. I agree with everything you've said, but I mean, there's a couple of things here to say. First of all, Ryan Casey, who I've had the honor of speaking to once or twice over the last couple of years, is sort of an interesting fellow because he didn't choose any of this. It was thrust upon him in the most horrible and awful of circumstances imaginable. Both you and I are married to different people. To lose your life partner in those circumstances is about the most unimaginably horrible thing you can imagine or can conceive of. And before that, he was just an ordinary guy going about his business, going to his job, listening to the radio, enjoying his sports. And so all of a sudden he's thrust into this position where he's expected to talk about the impact of the crime, the worst crime that I think most of us could ever imagine suffering, on him. And he decides that in order to honor Ashling Murphy and to do her memory justice, he's going to speak from the heart and say what he feels. And in that case, what he said was, and it bears repeating, he asked a very provocative question, which is, how is it that somebody can come to this country, live here for 10 years, never work a day in his life, exist on benefits, and then take away the woman who he loved when he and she had been doing everything right? It's a very powerful and very provocative question, isn't it? So he's been thrust into this position. It's not something he chose. It's not like you and me. You and I go on this podcast every week. We offer our opinions for people who want to hear them, and we do it voluntarily, and no one has made us do it, and circumstances haven't made us do it. That's not the case with Ryan Casey. He went out and he spoke from the heart. And by the way, something that has to be said about him is that over the last 2 years, while this case has been going on, he's had this hanging over him. He's had that allegation hanging over him. His lawyers will have told him not to speak about it in public. He's had to keep his head down and get on and not comment publicly. And I know that what was said about him on what was effectively national television had a profoundly hurtful effect upon him. So I'm delighted. I'm delighted for him. And, I'm glad that I'm not even glad about, the journalist in question. We'll come to that in a moment, by the way. But I'm glad that he has received what is in effect a full and public vindication. I mean, he didn't need it because I think vast majority of people in the country were on his side, but he's received it anyway, and I think we can all cheer that.
Yeah, completely.
Of course, there were two parties to this case. The BBC was one, and Ryan Casey was another. And I've seen a lot of people saying today, well, why didn't he take action against the journalist in question, who was Kitty Holland, the social affairs editor of the Irish Times? And the simple answer to that question is that the BBC, as I understand it, assumed liability for both their own liability and indeed for hers. So she is now legally in the clear. And what was interesting today is that in all the media coverage, bar our own on Gript, and I think I saw a piece on goss.ie, and I don't know, I didn't see the Independent's coverage, but in the Irish Times, RTE, the Journal, and a whole bunch of other places, it was like something had been said by somebody about Ryan Casey, but the journalist who had actually said it somehow evaded any responsibility in the media for having made the comments that just cost the BBC an eye-watering sum of money. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that when you're Kitty Holland, the socialist affairs correspondent for the Irish Times, and yeah, I did just say that on purpose, you are of the protected class, and the media will rally around you and do everything they can to minimize the damage to you personally, or that you might be called out, or that people might be reminded of a 2-year-old story where you said something wildly inappropriate about somebody who is absolutely 100% entitled to their opinion and is a victim of a horrendous crime and was speaking out on it, and she bit off more than she could chew. And if that was somebody on the other side, or somebody who wasn't a part of the protected class, their name and the whole thing would be dragged through the media again this week. But because she isn't, it wasn't.
It's worth recalling, I think, in relation to Kitty, what she was saying. And I mean, in fairness, I'm not, in fairness to her, she was basically asked about the lack of media coverage. I don't know if you remember this, at the time of Ryan's victim impact statement, which he'd said the stuff I just repeated a few moments ago. And so she is not, to my mind, the only guilty party here, because she was asked that question because so many people in the media had essentially, and not everybody, by the way, because the Irish Independent, I know, for example, published it in full, and some other publications did, maybe not initially, but they did. But certainly the initial reaction in that first 24 hours, and certainly from organs like the Irish Times and RTE, was, we're not publishing this. We're not going to refer to the controversial bit in it. We're going to suppress that from the public. And that became a controversy.
Didn't it go up on RTE and then was taken back down or something? Was that, do I have a vague memory of that? Did it go up? Was there a headline at lunchtime and then it was gone again or something? Maybe I'm
that sounds familiar to me, but I don't think listeners should take that as fact, because I can't remember it as fact. But
I can't remember either, but it's just something in there. Yeah.
There were shenanigans. And it wasn't. So basically, Kitty is invited onto BBC Spotlight. And one of the things she's asked by Mark Carruthers is effectively, why didn't the media cover this? Why did they cover up his victim impact statement? Because it had kind of had then a Streisand effect on the victim impact statement, because the story became, why isn't this being covered? And then lots of people heard about it. And then Kitty's asked about this, and she basically, it has to be said that she wasn't talking directly about Ryan Casey. I didn't think she meant it. What she was basically saying was effectively, we've got a responsibility not to report or cover or repeat things that might be likely to incite anti-immigration sentiment. And she was basically saying, look, the media's job is not to publish things that might whip up sentiments that we don't agree with. Which obviously was defamatory because it implied that what Ryan Casey had said was anti-immigrant, when it was actually anti a specific culture around a specific type of immigration. So yeah, she's not the only villain, but I find it fascinating that the degree to which the media has gone to protect her today in the last 12 or 13 hours since this settlement was announced, because I don't think they would do it for anyone else. I don't think they would do it for Gript Media. I think, for example, if Gript Media was sued and as part of that I was sued, or it was something I had written, I think my name would not only be in the first paragraph, the second paragraph, third paragraph, also be in the 13th, 14th and 15th, and as many times as they could get it in. And I think the lack of including a really relevant part of the story, which is the name of the journalist who was responsible for making these comments that gave rise to this notable lawsuit, which is important enough for you to cover, I think you're playing mates' rights there. I think everyone can see it, frankly.
If it was you, if it was you, not only would your name be in the first, second, and the 14th paragraph, but there'd be also like 4 paragraphs midway through, which would be like, John McGurk allegedly reversed over a hedgehog when he was 17, learning to drive, and this kind of shite.
Oh yeah,
that's my
the
point.
list of every past controversy. Yeah, and not just, I don't want to make this about me, because it's also true of a whole load of people. A whole load of people.
Of course it is, but it's still. I'm using you as an example because you're the one who's sitting here with me, but like, of course there's loads of other people, but that's my point. My point is that there is a protected class of person. If you have the right opinions about the right things, you will be protected, and if you don't, you won't. That's it.
Yeah. And the other thing here is, I think the important thing to add to this is that this would all be, I don't want to end on a depressing note on this topic, but this would all be well and good if you actually thought the Irish media had learned even a single lesson from it. But no, these are people who've forgotten nothing and will never learn anything. And if you want evidence of that, the evidence of it is the cover up for Kitty Holland today. Kitty Holland is in my view, I get in trouble when I say this for some reason, but like I do judge people on what they're like in person. Maybe that's naive, but I like Kitty Holland. I think she's a nice person. I think she's also a communist. I think she's an extreme left-wing person. I think she uses her journalism quite unashamedly to push a particular political agenda. I don't even think she would deny that. She comes from a family with a long history of political activism on the very hard left of Irish politics. And I think her colleagues know that. And I think they are protecting her in a way that they would never protect a journalist who didn't have those politics and who wasn't so politically active in spreading them. And that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're a nice person to have a coffee with. If those are your politics and you're in a position of influence, they should be called out. And if you've done something that has led to the British Broadcasting Corporation losing a very large sum of money because of something you've said, I think it's in the public interest that you should be identified.
And also, more importantly than the BBC, because I could give a shit about the BBC, you've done something that has caused pain and suffering to somebody who already had unimaginable levels of pain and suffering going on already.
I actually have personal experience of this, though. Do you not remember? During COVID, Muggins here went on RTE's primetime.
Oh yeah, I forgot about this.
We had a debate about lockdown measures and what have you. A debate which I think if you watch it back, I'm a harsh critic of my own performance, but I wasn't bad that night. But I did make a mistake because I was referring to a particular left-wing protest, and there are two extreme fringe Republican movements. Irigi is one of them, and the other one is called Saoirse, something like that. Anyway, I got them mixed up, and I linked the wrong extreme Republican movement to a shooting that had happened in Derry, the shooting of Lyra McKee, and I just flatly got it wrong. It was a mistake. I got two Republican movements mixed up. Now RTE
that was just a slip. But that was just a slip of the tongue. That was just you saying the wrong word.
Yes, but here's the point. RTE, on foot of that, ended up deciding to settle the defamation case taken by the wrongly named extreme Republican group, and they paid them out 20 grand. And in every single report of that settlement, in every newspaper, my name was right at the top. It was because of what John McGurk said. What John McGurk said in RTE cost RTE 20 grand. He's responsible. And yet when it's Kitty Holland who's cost the BBC a much larger sum of money for a much more significant piece of defamation, her name is completely gone. I mean, I would love, genuinely love. I mean, Hugh Linehan from the Irish Times wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago. Do you remember this, about the transgender debate, in which he was like, yeah, the media is biased. Yeah, we have all our house effects. Yeah, we've all this kind of different attitudes to our mates and not wanting to get too out over our skids. I mean, I'd love if he would address this. He never will, but I'd love if he'd address this, because it's patently obvious to anyone what's going on there.
Yeah. Anyway,
look, let's move on. There was an opinion poll at the weekend. What did you make of it?
so there's an opinion poll where it was -1, -1, right? Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and Sinn Féin.
Yeah, they all lost 1% support.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of like large numbers or whatever, I'm not sure, that's all within margin of error stuff. So I think that the thing that's interesting about it is sort of the stagnation overall. I mean, we had in a general election and people re-elected the same government or whatever, and I've had people who'd say to me, oh, like there was all this talk about people being angry about immigration or whatever, but in the end they voted the same government back in. But I wouldn't take the absence of the right candidates as a reflection of an absence of that sentiment, because I think there's a lot of anger and a lot of people out there who gave the government another chance, or I don't know, whatever. And I think that I think all of the parties are stagnating. I think it's all really boring. I think even the conversations about the presidential election are boring. It's also the time of year, like everybody's starting to check out a bit for silly season or whatever. But I mean, if I had to pick one big loser in there, you'd have to say it's Sinn Féin, because Sinn Féin seemed to have, they were doing really badly in advance of the general election. They rallied it a bit towards the end of the general election. And then since the general election, they seem to be back to the same mistake of just nothing really interesting, bit of bleating here and there about housing and but nothing really, no coherent strategy, no vision, and very flat. I mean, if you're the main opposition party and you have all the things that you can be giving out about, that Sinn Féin have as options to give out about, and you're losing the same percentage in a poll as the two government parties, you should be really concerned.
Yeah, but the public are to blame for this. The public chose Sinn Féin as the main opposition party. They did.
Well, what was their alternative?
No, I'm not. I'm not. Of course, they had alternatives. They could have elected 200 independents if they really wanted to. And I appreciate being a little bit harsh and provocative on the public, but like, Sinn Féin are a political party that a minimum of 65% of the Irish public is not only opposed to, but ferociously opposed to. And I don't care if you're in the 35% and you're listening to this and you're like, well, I don't agree with them on X, Y, and Z, but they're kind of nationalists and I kind of could live with them. There are 65% of us in this country who just won't. Like, who would literally quite happily, when we're going down ranking our preferences, put everyone ahead of them, because we think it's a bad idea fundamentally to elect revolutionary socialists to run the country, and Sinn Féin is a revolutionary socialist party.
But you could say 60% of the country, or more percentage of the country, feel the same way about Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil.
Yeah, they do, but the problem is, I think it's more of the country that feels that way about Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, if we're completely honest. I think and I think a lot of what's happening here is Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael winning the last election by default, because the alternative was a Sinn Féin-led government. In a way that it wasn't even in 2020, when Sinn Féin made that surge into becoming the opposition party because people were pissed off about some RIC commemoration. At the last election, Sinn Féin being the alternative government was the main factor in the government being re-elected. I would take that to my grave as a statement of certainty from talking to voters all around the country. And dissatisfaction with Sinn Féin as the main opposition party was a critical factor, both in their own support going backwards at the last election by several percentage points, and in the government sort of winning the election by default. But I just think when I look at that opinion poll, I'm utterly depressed about the state of Irish politics. And it's not about who's up and who's down. It's that nobody's up and nobody's down. So I wrote in a piece on Monday reacting to the opinion poll, and it seems to resonate with a lot of people, is that there's no one in Irish politics, Sarah, who is popular enough to actually command moral authority. There's no one in any of the opposition parties who's sitting there on sort of 42, 44% of the vote, ready to lead the next government, who's able to hold the current government to account and have them scurrying around doing X, Y, and Z to try and appeal to the population. So they're all sitting there, and no one really has any moral authority because they're all down 1%. Right? There's no massive movement behind them. And on the other hand, none of these fuckers are unpopular enough to worry about their jobs. If there was a general election in the morning, 85% of the TDs in the Oireachtas would hold their seats. So they've no incentive to change in any direction. No one's going to lose their job, and no one's going to win a whole load of seats. So you've got so they can afford to sit around and talk about Gaza all day and ignore the housing crisis and ignore everything else. I mean, okay, they don't ignore it; they pay lip service to it. But there's no fire to be lit under them because the public are sitting around kind of going, "Well, we don't like any of you enough to give you a mandate." No.
Yeah, but so what do you think it's going to take, or is this it for 5 years?
I think this is it for 5 years, to be honest. I think that, and I've said this for some time, I think that it will actually take a Sinn Féin government for there to be a significant realignment of Irish politics. Because I think what Sinn Féin are is they are a reservoir of discontent. They hold a lot of votes from a lot of people who would be very disappointed by what a Sinn Féin government would do. The kind of, the people who, expect miracles from their politics because they don't pay that much attention to it, and expect that Sinn Féin would govern in a particular way. We saw this happen with Sinn Féin, by the way, even when they were in opposition on immigration, right? A lot of people who voted for them sort of instinctively believing that because they waved the tricolour and we waved the tricolour, we got the same opinions.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think for a realignment to happen in Irish politics, ultimately, those of us who oppose the Sinn Féin government are going to have to suck one up and sort of watch what happens, because that's what I think it will take for this sort of current fugue to be broken.
Well, I always imagine, like, rightly or wrongly, that a Sinn Féin government wouldn't go the distance in terms of the 5 years. That you'd get a Sinn Féin government that would last 1.5 to 2 years, if even, because it probably wouldn't have much of a majority. I'm not sure that their TDs would have the mettle for the kind of, difficult decisions and kind of, for want of a better word, abuse they would get from their supporters once they started realising that they weren't actually able to deliver or couldn't deliver in the way that they said they would. So I'm not sure it'd be a long-term thing. But I think I agree with you that it kind of needs, it's so beige and so boring, but it also, for Sinn Féin, I think for a Sinn Féin government to happen, there also needs to be some events. The country has to have a few events, whether it be an economic event, whether it be, some kind of law and order event, something that sparks a big change. Like you made the point there that the RIC thing changed the fundamentally changed a lot of the results of that, not the last general election, the general election before. And so I think like a couple of seemingly minor events could start a kind of a train that would do this. But I think I'm broadly in agreement with you that it's just all very boring, and I don't know what it's going to take, but I think it needs to take something, because I ultimately think that with things like the Children's Hospital and immigration, and again, like I've said before, I'm not saying everything is wrong or everything isn't working. Some things are working fine, but there is some key issues, and there's a sort of a conspiracy of ghosting going on amongst the opposition and the government, where they collectively don't address certain things because it's convenient for them all to stay away from them. And I don't think that's fair for the people who are electing those politicians.
I disagree with you on one thing you said, which is at the start where you said you didn't think a Sinn Féin government would last 5 years because you thought they wouldn't have the stomach for the hard decisions.
Yeah.
See, this is where I think, and I have to say, and maybe I'm the one who's completely wrong about this. And time, there's only one way that'll prove which of us is right, but I think you're wrong. I think a huge mistake that a lot of people in Ireland make when thinking about Sinn Féin is to think of them as an ordinary political party. To think of them as basically kind of a new version of Fianna Fáil, right? That they'll go in there, they'll encounter a few hard decisions, there'll be a few strikes on the street, the markets will react badly, and the lads will get spooked over their seats and back down. I don't think if you look at parties in Sinn Féin's political family internationally, anywhere in the world, which is democratic centralism, that is likely to happen. I think it's much more likely to happen that they will make the country break before they break. That if they are pursuing an economic policy that spooks the markets, for example, they'll be more likely to impose capital controls on the markets than to submit to it being a bad idea. This is a party that brags of its links to the Chavista administration in Venezuela, that is still very proud of its support for the Cuban administration, that identifies itself in that sphere, not as a centre-left social democratic version of the UK Labour Party that has Republican politics. They identify themselves as a party of the hard left in the democratic centralism tradition. And in every country in the world where people like that have come to power, they do not back down in the face of things going badly. They continue to plough right through it until they fuck the country beyond recognition. And I think that's what Sinn Féin would do in government. I really hope they prove me wrong if and when they ever take power. But I think there are enough people in the country who have that instinctive feeling about what they would do. I mean, there's a reason Sinn Féin parliamentary parties never leak. You never get a leak of what happens at the Sinn Féin parliamentary party. Never. When was the last time a Sinn Féin TD disobeyed the party whip? It was Peadar Tobin on abortion. It's the one time it's ever happened.
Did Baileann win? Baileann win? Did she not quit the party?
I don't think that was for disobeying the whip. I don't think that was for
Anyway.
disobeying the whip. It might have been for not paying her staff. Back in court for that last week. But I don't know if it was for that. Listeners can remind us in the comments what it was exactly, but I can't remember. But it's a fairly rare occurrence. They're very disciplined, and I don't think they get spooked. And I don't think it's a parliamentary party that calls the shots. I think the shots in Sinn Féin are called from outside the parliamentary party, and I think a lot of people instinctively understand that as well. I'm sure Sinn Féin would deny that, but that's my instinct about them.
I think they
To
do.
this day.
I think they do deny that.
Well, then I look forward to being proved wrong. But yeah. I think just in general on politics in Ireland at the moment, it's just very depressing. So you mentioned the presidential election. We talk about that for a moment. Who's your favourite candidate?
I don't have one yet. It's very boring, isn't it? I was kind of hoping McGill would run. Nick Delahanty is running. So far, he's my favourite. I don't know enough about his campaign to know whether or not he's in with a shot of getting the nomination, because as people know, it's not as simple as just putting your name forward. But
I saw RTE today running the flag of my old, and full disclosure, old and dear friend, and Declan Ganley. I saw his name being run up the presidential flag in an RTE piece today. I think he'd be an interesting candidate. I stand by my view that anyone who runs for president has to be at least a little teeny bit insane. So I was going to say that, friend or no friend, and whatever candidate you are, because it is a really brutal and punishing campaign.
the other thing about it is that, and I think this probably suits the government as well, but it's going to be a very short campaign. We're now in July. The election's in November. What date?
I don't know. I don't know the precise date.
Maybe there's no date for it yet, but it'll be in November. I mean, July and August will be gone, and then it's September, October. It'll be a very, very short campaign. But you're right, it's a particularly nasty campaign. It's quite personal. The media don't cover themselves in glory, and it's kind of a race to the bottom and finding the most, again, like to use my example about you who ran over a hedgehog when they were learning how to drive, kind of stuff. And I think you're right that you do have to be a bit mad to want to do it. But so far, I mean, Fianna Fáil seem to not know what they're doing vis-a-vis a candidate. I've heard a few names. Fine Gael seem to have their candidate.
Well, they
Holly
assume
Kearns
they
is,
have their candidate. They
well,
assume
we
that
assume,
it's.
yeah. Holly
Oh,
Kearns has announced today that she's not running. So that's disappointing
good.
for everyone.
Oh, I'm devastated.
Yeah. I'm not running. Are you running? But
Gave it some thought for a few minutes, and then
yeah.
I realized, no, I don't think that one's for me. After all, I ran over that
No.
hedgehog.
Yeah, exactly.
Just I want the listeners to know that I've never in my life run over a hedgehog. In case people are taking that literally, I just want to say that hedgehogs are wonderful
And I'm only
creatures.
saying it because I absolutely love hedgehogs, and I happen to have seen a dead hedgehog today on the road, so it's in my head. But
It's interesting you blame me for it straight away, even though I was
I know,
near
yeah. Even though you're not even in Dublin,
Yeah.
somehow it was your fault. But McDougall
What
ruled
about Joe
himself
Duffy?
out. Yeah, I thought about this, and I saw him being interviewed on RT on his last show, or after on the news after his last show last week, and he didn't definitively say no.
He didn't. There's two things that struck me about that. The first is that I often feel like a stranger in my own country. And maybe if you're listening to this, you can relate to it. And maybe you'll tell me I'm not on my own. But I actually feel like I'm a stranger in my own country. Because it occurred to me, there are people out there who are actually turning on the television news to watch what Joe Duffy had to say to them about his last day on RTE radio. And this was not sort of a celebrity feature. This was like the main evening news. And there's Joe Duffy there, and they had a band there, and Michael D wrote a letter, and it was like, this is a lad retiring from a job. I mean, how big an audience does Liveline have? I think the biggest audience it's ever had is 300,000 people in a country of over 5 million. It's extraordinary to me. And then there was the thing during the week where, I mean, I don't know Joe Duffy from Adam. I was on Liveline once about 15 years ago to clarify something that he'd said about somebody I was working for at the time. I've never met him. But like the idea of him as a left-wing unity candidate, I mean, the candidate of the revolutionary socialists in the country is going to be a guy who's just spent the last 20 years lining his pockets with one of the comfiest jobs in RTE and one of the biggest pay packets in RTE, never having worked a day in the private sector, to my knowledge, in his life, at least for the last 30 years. That's your left-wing unity candidate, the representative of the working man.
And people will vote for it.
This is the thing. I think he'd get 25% easily.
I think if he ran, I think he could win.
Well, George Lee won when he was running for Fine Gael, so yeah, I mean, I think George Lee is.
But Joe Duffy's on it completely on another level, and people will love it, and especially because at the moment there's no real candidate that's standing out as the kind of obvious, streets ahead of everyone else kind of thing. You never know. Like I said, he didn't rule it out. So what, would he run for Labour?
Well, I feel the talk was as sort of a left-wing unity candidate, which I presume would encompass
okay.
But maybe not Sinn Féin, but certainly Labour, the Social Democrats, the Greens, maybe People Before Profit, maybe Sinn Féin. I think if you add up the Labour seats, the Stoke Dem seats, Roderick O'Gorman, plus what they've got in the Shannon, I think you roughly get to 20. And I'm sure he'd pick up if they wanted to, I'm sure they could pick off a left-wing independent or two, like Alice Mary Higgins and the Shannon, to get them over the 20 signatures to nominate somebody together as a candidate. But Catherine Connolly is TG, is their obvious choice, I would have thought.
Yeah. But again, but then it's like, take Joe Duffy out of it, and if you have like any number of the people from Fine Gael that it probably is, any number of the people from Fianna Fáil that it probably is, it's kind of anyone's to win if nobody interesting gets in.
People need to remember that it's a 50% election, right? So it's a proportional representational election where the winner has to get 50% plus one or be the last person standing. And I think that probably does favour. I mean, I think it's probably hard to look past Mairead McGuinness. I mean, if she runs, if Fine Gael get her over the line. And because I just think she's probably guaranteed somewhere between 25 and 30% of the vote on the first count, because she'll be the sensible establishment candidate, right? That's worth 20-25%. Even if there's a Fianna Fáil candidate, let's say that comes down to 18% and the Fianna Fáiler gets 12-14% or whatever. Then if you look where the transfers are going to go, in any scenario at the end, where if you can start with 25-30%, say she gets that, in any scenario at the end, no matter who she's left fighting, the transfers will favour her. So let's imagine people we've mentioned on this podcast, let's imagine that the last three candidates standing are Joe Duffy, Mairead McGuinness, and Declan Ganley. Well, I think if Ganley is third, his transfers will favour Mairead McGuinness over the likes of Joe Duffy because he's the left-wing candidate. She's the sensible centrist. Ganley and Joe will be more opposed to each other. And I think the opposite will be true as well. I think the Joe Duffy transfers would massively favour her over Declan Ganley in the other direction. So I think ultimately it's an election that is rigged, as most proportional representation elections are, to favour the sort of sensible centrist establishment candidate. There's a reason we have that electoral system.
I just wouldn't underestimate Fine Gael's ability to shit the bed on every election that seemed like that was theirs it was theirs and in the bag beforehand. They don't run good campaigns. They're not good at campaigning, and you know they've had disasters. Am I right in saying that Fine Gael have never had won the presidential election?
You are right in saying Fine Gael have never won the presidential. You I think they renominated like a couple of sitting presidents, like Mary McAleese and so on. But but no, they didn't.
But not only have they never won it, but they've actually polled quite poorly, and had disastrous campaigns with a number of candidates. So I wouldn't be confident if I were them. But at the moment, I think the field is very quiet.
Yeah, well, people forget it's an awful job. Like it's an awful job. I mean, Michael D. Higgins, because of his advanced age, I think has escaped the worst of it. Because people don't expect him to sit into the the presidential Mercedes at 7 a.m. on a Monday morning and drive to somewhere and no disrespect to the people who live there, but drive somewhere in the back arse of Mayo or Donegal on the other side of the country to open a community centre and spend the whole afternoon talking to people in old folks' homes and stuff. I'm sure you have to be a particular person to do that kind of job. And if you're not temperamentally suited to it, it will become an awful job very quickly. Like Mary McAleese was really good at that stuff because she's temperamentally suited to it. Mary Robinson, I think, couldn't wait to get out of the presidency fast enough because that element of the job, the sort of day-to-day dreariness of it, I think didn't suit her. The UN was more exciting. And Michael D. Higgins has gotten away with not doing it because he's quite old and no one expects him to show up to these things and maintain a schedule on that level. But if you're a younger candidate who takes on the job, that is what's expected of you.
Yeah.
Or do you think I'm wrong?
Well, I mean, Michael D. Higgins has opened up the job to that you're able to comment and talk about whatever you want, and widely past the parameters of what the presidential voice should be. So maybe the job seems more appealing to people because now they know from him that the precedent has been set that you can run your mouth off and talk about things whenever you feel like it.
Anyway, Fianna Fáil still haven't picked their candidate?
Not that I know of.
I was just thinking there as you were chatting, I was thinking if I was in Fianna Fáil and I was looking for a candidate, I'd be looking for somebody with experience, maybe a former TD, somebody who'd served as a junior minister, maybe been to Brussels for a while, a bit of experience in business, maybe Dublin based.
I know what you're doing and you can stop right now.
Okay. If you got that joke, great. If you didn't, you'll figure it out at some stage. All right.
He'll be listening, so he'll be laughing.
All right. Let's move on to let's talk about this whole business about the GPO, because Niamh and I had a reasonably firm exchange of views. And by the way, when Niamh and I have an exchange of views, I know she got some emails about it and I got one or two as well. When Niamh and I have an exchange of views on Gript, it's always in good humour and it's always intended to be respectful and robust. But she and I had an exchange of views in print this week about this whole GPO redevelopment plan. Now, I've got no connections to the GPO. Your great-grandfather was there fixing James Connolly's ankle while the bullets were firing around him. What did you make of the government's business with its plans to redevelop the GPO and turn it into a shopping mall?
Not a fan. I mean, we had this whole Save Moore Street campaign for years, and I don't understand how you could go from a Save Moore Street campaign to a turn the GPO into a shopping mall campaign. I mean, the amount of issues, I would say personally, with O'Connell Street that could be addressed or whatever without impacting on such a historically significant building. And That's not me saying that it automatically should just be a full-time museum and then that's it and whatever, because I'm not sure that's good for O'Connell Street either. But we could come up with something better. We have consistently made hash of O'Connell Street between the different things that have been allowed to be on O'Connell Street, turned into a complete dump. And I think that turning something so historically significant into a shopping mall or whatever is like not a good idea, and just I don't know, it just feels like, John, I know you're gonna laugh at this or whatever, but don't you ever just feel like there's a slow dismantling of everything of cultural significance to Irishness? And this to me feels like another part of that.
Yeah, I do, but I also think that might be making people oversensitive in relation to this.
It's the
Does that make sense?
GPO.
Yeah, designed by Francis Johnson in the early 1800s as part of the city's architectural heritage, built to be in alignment, by the way. Those pillars at the front of the GPO were originally supposed to set off the pillar of Nelson's column. That was directly opposite. It was an architectural, they were a duo, they weren't just one thing. Building with a long historic record that I don't think should be boiled down to 1 week in 1916 in the first place. But secondly, they're actually keeping the museum. They're keeping the museum. They're saying it's going to be a museum. There's going to be a historic centre. You're still going to have the statue of Kitty Holland that's in there, but we're also looking to redevelop it into a place that people might want to go. So we're going to put in a little commercial area, which I assume will be primarily sort of tourist trinkets, like
Oh, great! One of those shops.
Well, what would you like to see happen? Because this is the thing. I've heard a lot of criticism of the plan, but I haven't heard anyone actually say, "This is what I'd like to see."
I don't know. Look, this is above my pay grade to decide what exactly you should do, but I don't think that what are those tourist trinket shops
Carol's
called?
gift shop.
Carol's gift shop or any of that is where it's at either. And John, there are smart people out there. There's architects. There's people who are involved in city planning or whatever. If I sat down here for 2 hours and Googled what's interesting things. Here, better yet, ask ChatGPT what interesting things have been done worldwide with buildings that are of historical significance to keep them used without turning them into a strip mall. I'm sure that ChatGPT would come up with a better idea than what's being proposed right here.
I have an idea.
Other countries, I'm absolutely positive of this, have said, right, you have this building of historical significance. It's beautiful on the outside. It has a lot of emotive and a lot of importance to a lot of people. We don't want it to just sit there empty with a museum in it and blah, 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 blah. We want people to use it and enjoy it. We want to bring life into it. But I don't want it to be a Starbucks. So how do we find a balance there? And we that's just not thought out. That's just not what we do. And I'm guaranteeing you that other countries have done that. You just want it to be a Starbucks, do you?
I don't. So in Krakow, in Poland, for example, and if you're from Krakow in Poland and you're listening to this and I mangle this story, forgive me. What I'm going to say is approximately right. It may not be entirely factually correct, but it's true in any case. That I can't remember the specific reason for it, but in the central square in Krakow, every couple of hours there's a guy who goes up to one of the really old towers and he plays the bugle or whatever, and it recalls back to a time when the city was under siege, and the bugle was played to signal this, that, or the other. It's really historically significant over there, and I feel like a Philistine for having forgotten it because I was only there last year. But it's a real sort of celebration of a historical moment in that city's existence that happens on a daily basis. 14, 15 times a day on every couple of hours, and tourists are there and they can't miss it. And I think if you're going to go down that road, I think you could turn the GPO into kind of like a living museum of Irish history.
Yeah.
You could have like every Sunday for tourists, you could actually have a reenactment of the Proclamation of Independence that people would want to come and video and watch. That's the thing that you could do. You could make it an event that tourists would come. Well, if you do it properly, like not some lad in a bad getup, but actually done properly in sort of period clothing, and all the rest of it. You could turn the entire building into a museum of sort of the history of Dublin. pre and post independence, by the way. There could be a section on Georgian Dublin. There could be a section on Queen Victoria's visit in 1905, the Easter Rising, all of those things, and turn it into a place that people can go and listen to the... Why are you laughing? Is it because I mentioned Queen Victoria's visit?
I'm just thinking about like a live theatre. I went to Salem in Boston a couple of years ago with my sister. And like some of the museums there are fantastic, and they've got kind of like almost like live theatre kind of the Crucible and, you know, all these different things. And then I was just laughing because I was thinking you could go in, you could turn it into a live theatre, you could come in off O'Connell Street, you'd come in, you'd watch like, I don't know, plays or different things about Irish history or whatever, and like the sound of the bullets or whatever. And then you come out onto O'Connell Street and then you could get slashed in the face by a junkie and just like round off your experience of violence in Dublin. And that's why I was laughing. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, that's true. You can make the authentic modern Irish cultural experience. Anyway, look,
but you could. There's other things to do. I just think that it's lazy. We could do better, and we should do better.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there's certainly a case for doing better. And in fairness, the piece I wrote did not suggest that there wasn't. But I also think, like, a lot of the time in Ireland, when an idea does come along to do something, I mean, the worst is assumed of the idea. That's first of all, right? So
Yeah,
they said they're putting a commercial centre into the GPO, and immediately people were like, they're going to have abracadabra in there, aren't they? I don't think that's
hold on. Yeah, I agree with you, except that the shite that was made of O'Connell Street for years of fast food restaurants and nonsense would make you think that might be a possibility, John.
Yeah, okay. No, fair point. But I do think this happens with a range of projects that past failures have made us sort of so nervous to embrace any new idea because we assume it will be a failure, and then very little gets done. Look, I think it's important. We're very negative about Dublin, but like some things that have happened in Dublin over the years have been really, really good. The Docklands redevelopment being the most obvious one. I think that area down where I can't remember the exact name of the square, but where they have the new National Theatre, and then there's the square with all the bars and what have you behind it, and the open area of water. I think that is a spectacular development, and it's got all those kind of standing red lights and things. We can do nice things in Dublin. We have done some nice things. And I don't think we should just write off every plan to redevelop something. I think O'Connell Street needs a redevelopment on that scale, by the way. I think the whole thing needs a redevelopment on that scale. And probably if I was doing it, even though I'm not a Green, I'd pedestrianise O'Connell Street as well. That'd be the first thing I'd do. Because I just think, I would.
It's practically, I mean, they just changed, they changed the traffic system so often that's practically pedestrianised as it is. I don't think you can drive up half of it now anymore, last I remember.
Look, it's never going to be...
I don't think the cars are the problem on O'Connell Street, John. I think there's loads of issues with the city centre and O'Connell Street, whatever. Could be fabulous. Could be turned into a whole, like, you know, place that you want to go. But there's a few issues that need to be addressed. A few more police, a few less takeaways, and a bit of imagination.
The problem is, I think when you stand at the top of O'Connell Street, up near Parnell Square, up near the theatre, and you look down, and you should be able to look down and look across O'Connell Bridge, and you should be able to see where the streets divide on the opposite side into Delir Street and the other one. And you should be really visually impressed, or whatever it's called. I never remember street names. One of them is called Delir Street. That's good enough for me. If you go to just two examples of cities relatively close, so you go to London and you've got the Mall, which is obviously the big street leading down to Buckingham Palace, and then you go to Paris, you've got the Champs-Élysées. Dublin doesn't have a sort of central thoroughfare that can compare, and there's absolutely no reason. There's absolutely no reason with a bit of political imagination why we couldn't. And yes, it would require hard decisions, it would require major redevelopment, but I don't see why that couldn't be our ambition, rather than just sticking a massive junkie's needle in the middle of it and having the statue of Daniel O'Connell covered in pigeon shit from one end of the year to the other, and having the GPO smell like wee outside it. We can do better than that, but I don't think we shit over every idea to make it better just because no one's come up with a better one yet.
It's very evocative.
Thank you. Said in a chocolatey voice as well, by the way. Just let's finish up on something not light, because I don't want to say it's light. We'll pause the discussion about Jim Risch and the Occupied Territories Bill and all that kind of stuff, because we've done it. And we're not going to say anything new there anyway. How are you coping with the school summer holidays? This is the first full week of them. You've got 2 young kids in primary school, and I've seen a couple of people write this week for the first time in a long time, but it seems to be becoming an issue. Are the school summer holidays, in your view, too long?
No, I don't think the school. I actually think if you look at Ireland on a scale in terms of European summer holidays, it's actually not or less than some countries. I know Greece is a country I spend quite a bit of time in, as you know, and Greek kids got their holidays at least 2 weeks before the Irish kids did. And they go back around the same time. So no, it's not that I don't think that the holidays are too long, and I think that the kids, funnily enough, and I didn't really appreciate this until I had kids of my own, but they get tired, It's like by the end they're tired. But boy oh boy is it difficult. I mean, even summer camps, you're talking mega money if you try and put your kids into summer camps, or do you get a minder? Then you're talking about the hours of summer camps being different from your normal hours of school. So most summer camps are kind of starting at 10. Anyway, the ones I'm using. So I don't know what you're supposed to do with that, etc., etc., etc. So it's massively stressful, and expensive. And I think a lot of people, certainly a lot of my friends who are, as we've discussed on the podcast before, in the kind of cost of living difficulties at the moment, the added expense of summer camps and everything that goes with it is just crippling. But I don't think the school holidays are too long. I don't know. I just wish the summer camps weren't so expensive.
I just think it's an interesting question because of the way society has changed. I mean, so it doesn't apply to me. I don't care how long they are, because I don't have either the joy or the complication of having children in my life. So it doesn't affect me. But I will note that if you're in London and you're a school pupil, you don't get your holidays this year, the 23rd of July. And you have 5 weeks off. The 5 weeks of the last week of July and the 4 weeks of August. Whereas if you're an Irish student, you get something like 8 or 10 weeks. And it's not that I think those. First of all, my wife's a teacher, so I don't want, on that level, I don't want the holidays to change. But I do wonder how it's another example of how society has said we want more and more and more and more and more and more and more women to go into the workplace. We want more and more two income families, and yet we're exposing you to this quite lengthy 2-month period of the year where you've got to find other things for your kids to do. I'm not sure how long that will be politically tenable. I think it's politically tenable for the next 4 or 5 years, but I think, just judging on the number of pieces I've read about this, which have really started to pop up in the last couple of years, I think if you're a kid enjoying your summer holidays, be thankful, because by the time you left school, I'm not sure the summer holidays will be the same length.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, look, people have to figure it out. I have a friend, she actually listens to this podcast, and she has a son who's the same age as my son, and we tend to put them in the same camps, or her son is the same age as one of my sons, and then kind of try and, take turns in doing the pickups and different things. But you're talking about flying by the seat of your pants, trying to get back, get here, get there. A school day is from kind of 10 to 9:15 until 2:30. Summer camps are 10 until 1, maybe 12 in some cases. It's a big, big, big difference. So yeah, I don't know what the answer to that is long term, but I think that the answer to that is the same as the answer to the overwhelming costs that people incur when it comes to children in general, in terms of crashes, in terms of all kinds of childcare, and that is, if we want people to have more children, if we want to, put our money where our mouth is in terms of families and supporting families and supporting people, well, then some of this stuff needs to be looked at.
I agree. I agree. Because it is. I do sympathise with people who have who are working a whole bunch of jobs and suddenly have kids at home for the whole summer. I think it's a difficult position, and several people have emailed in about it, and several people have talked about it. I don't know what the answer is. So anyway, is there anything else you'd like to tell the listeners before we take our leave?
Don't think so. Not this week. No, it's quiet. We're getting into silly season now, John. You're going to have to start. We need a scandal. We really need a political scandal. So if you're a politician and
Which-
you're listening and you've got some dark secret, do us a favor and get it out there in the next couple of weeks so we can talk about you.
Yes. Yeah. Anything. Mobile phone expenses being fiddled, like Ivor Cally, that'd be great. Some kind of, extramarital thing, whatever it is, just something that'll keep us entertained. Listen, and thank you very much if you're a listener. I hope you have been entertained by me and Sarah this week, and thank you very much for all your communications, even the relentless one from the person who tells me that I need to get new glasses. I have decided, dear listener, that at some point over the summer I'll take you up on that and get the glasses upgraded.
And I don't
you can
normally wear
stop
my
panicking.
glasses, but I did this week because, as I said to you last week, I don't normally wear them, but last week I couldn't really read some of the stuff that was on my screen here, so I thought I'm just too tired to not wear the glasses this week. So there's a lot of people who are really interested in our glasses. So
There are.
sorry.
There are. Okay, we will leave it there. Thank you very much. I've been John. She's been Sarah. This has been The Week That Really Was. You've been the audience. You've been great as ever. And we will see you this time next week. Take care.